coming in. It's like this is I know that this is the last season, last session of the conference, right? So I appreciate you guys coming in here. I hope I'm gonna try to make it more fun and not try. All right, so the session is about games, about single player games, and why, in my opinion, you guys should consider having some kind of backend to it, some kind of online interaction to it, and why. All right, so let's first start with this. Who plays Elden Ring in here? Yes. Anyone else plays Elden Ring? It's a Souls kind of game where you die a lot. Yeah.
Looks great. I haven't had a chance to play it.
It's amazing. By the way, like you should. I mean, like if that's the first Souls games that I actually play. I don't know about you, but and I die a lot. Right? I mean, just like everyone else. Probably about after 200 times I beat it. I mean the first boss, not the actual game. So, anyway, like why did I bring this up is that Elden Ring is probably I was playing that game when I was thinking about this talk, but also it's fundamentally a single player game, right? But if you play Elden Ring, you know that there's actually a lot of online interaction to it. So I'm going to talk a lot about Elden Ring on some of the components to it, just for illustration, but also talk about it. All right. Hi, my name is Raymond Arifianto. I've been in the industry for a while. You can just read it. But I've been in both Xbox, PlayStation, EA, Ubisoft, and now I'm the VP of Tech in AccelByte. And for caveat, we are hiring and we do backend for games. So in my career, I think I feel very strongly about online interaction and all the different parts of it, and I'm just I'm very, very passionate about it. I'm also passionate about cross-platform. I know it's not for everyone, but I feel that having experience that's different from platform to platform is kind of silly these days and age. So players shouldn't even think about what platforms they play. It should just be cross experience. Anyway, so enough about me. Let's talk more about the games. All right, so this is just a table of content. I'm just going to skip this through. If you think about single player games, right? There's these days and age, single player and multiplayer is all kind of merged anyway. Back in the days, in Nintendo, Sega, right? I mean, when consoles are not really connected, right? We made games, we put it on the shelf, you buy it, you play it by yourself, and then that's that, right? I mean, that's historically speaking, games started that way. But then we have internet connections, and now everyone plays in their phones and consoles and PC, and they're all connected anyway. So, if you see, in this spectrum, right, these days and age, there is the single player only, all the way to the multiplayer only, right, where there are some games that you cannot really experience it without playing with others. But then we also have games that you can fully enjoy solo, right? I mean, so basically it's a spectrum, and there are a lot of things in between those spectrums. There are games that you make the multiplayer experience to be optional. You can still enjoy the game, like Elden Ring, for instance, or Sekiro, or whatever, right? And then there's the games that there is two different modes, right? Like Halo Infinite is you have campaign, which you can play completely single player, or you have the multiplayer, right? And there's, what I'm trying to say is that it depends on what games you want to make and what experience you want to craft to your players. But these days and age, there's always some kind of online interaction in your games. And I'll kind of talk about what are the different interactions that we can talk about. All right, so I'm gonna kind of put it in these three big buckets. The first one is data. Data is probably why you should probably consider having some kind of backend for your games. The second one is community and engagement, because these days and age, you want to build your community for your player base, and for that you need to engage them, right? Because if you don't engage your player base, there's no player base. And the third one is just quality of life for you and for your players. So I'll kind of go over each one of these. Data. who played this game? Yes. This game is actually Walking Dead. Walking Dead from Telltale Games, amazing series. You can play it. I mean, like it's fundamentally it's a single player game, right? I mean, like it's a narrative-based single player game where you play from the different character perspective and you enjoy you make decisions throughout the game, and the story changes based on your decision, right? And this is not the only game, obviously. Like Mass Effect does the same thing, right? I mean, like you choose Paragon or Renegade. I mean, like there's a lot of these types of games. I chose this game because at the end of the story, it will actually tell you, what are the other people that's playing, right? What is the percentage of the people that's choosing different route, for instance? Because every route it's a branch kind of game, right? Branch narrative. I found that pretty interesting because like it kind of tells you like in the grand scheme of things, is like from all the player base, how is your decisions, right? So it's all data. I mean, like it's all just like statistics and like ratio, right? I mean, like implementation wise, it's pretty simple. But then like if you start digging into the telemetry, the example that I showed you about The Walking Dead, that is like you present it to the players. Sometimes you don't need to show it to the players. You still need the data. Like these are some of the graph that we collected from some of the games. I'm not going to say which games. And like I think the left one tells you like the average mission of like for a given level, how many people either getting killed or fail the mission or they have to reinitialize, right? So like it tells you about the experience that you're crafting, right? So if you care about, is this level too hard or too easy, right? Or like, is this level frustrating to the players, right? I mean, like, how do you know is by capturing the data? You can, and then you can go even wider of like, like how many players play my game and then at some point they hit a wall and they stop playing, for instance, right? Until you release a patch and then they do it again, right? By the way, a caveat in here is like everything that I said in here is not, I mean, you can put it to any kind of experience that you want to do, right? So for instance, like the gentleman is like wants to make an experience for, is it pharmaceutical students, right? I mean, like, it's the same thing, right? I mean, like, like if you are crafting an experience that people cannot use or cannot experience fully, then like you probably want to know about it. So, and then you can go into like, in this level, if I hit this point, the frame rate drops, for instance, right? That's another type of data that you want to collect, you want to know. So that's data. Another bucket is community engagement. I think these days, well, like the reason we make games is so you want players to experience it, right? You want players to actually experience the experience that you're crafting, right? And for that, you need to be able to engage them. You want to be able to capture them because there's so many content out there. You want to engage your players. So one way to do it is there are different ways that you can engage your players. The first one is, again, Elden Ring. I mean, like if you play Elden Ring and you didn't turn off by default, it's a connected experience. I mean, you will see these messages, right? And then like you will tell you sometimes some of the messages are useful, like, hey, there's gonna be a boss in front of me. And then some of them are just like, try to finger the hole. But it does create a sense of community, like one way or another, right? Whether you like it or not. You will play alone in this world, in the lands between, that's the name of the world, but you feel that you're part of something bigger, right? And as a tip, if you are going in this direction, is like, don't put a text box where they can type in anything because it's just not gonna go well. So, it's a tip. But then like if you actually like extract this out more, player messages is just a type of user-generated content, right? I mean, like you're generating content. You're letting your players to share whatever they're creating. These are like the left one is actually the first game that I've ever shipped back in 360. It's Banjo-Kazooie, nuts and bolts. It's a single player game, but then you can share your schematics of your vehicle, right? You can create different kinds of vehicle by bolting like a bunch of parts, and then you can share the schematics so people can discover your creation. And I think that's pretty cool. And then all the way to the right is like, that's that game, God of War. They have photo mode. Photo mode is very, very prevalent these days, right? What I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of ECGC types. I'm not going to go through it, but you know that it's a way to engage your players. The next one is leaderboard, right? Leaderboard is also a type of way to engage your players, even though they're actually all playing by themselves. It's not a multiplayer game, right? And side note about leaderboard, leaderboard is driven from data. And it goes back to the first thing that I mentioned about stats, right? I mean, so a lot of leaderboard is actually driven from statistics. So you send the data and then you process the data in the backend and voila, you have leaderboard. So it's another way to engage your community. That one is from Spelunky, and it's also single player experience. This one I kind of cheated. Payday 2 is not a single player game, but I just found it hilarious. So Payday 2 have this thing, like they do a community event, I think for a couple of weeks, where basically like if the community, overall community is able to get 1 million kills, I think, yeah, it's 1 million kills, then they will unlock this ridiculous weapon that looks like a giant spoon, right? It's kind of nifty, like it gets your community going, right? And there's nothing that says that like you can unlock or you can grant certain kind of content even in a single player game based on people's participation. Right? Now you might argue that like, well, it's a single player game, everything should be unlocked from the get-go. Sure, I mean, like if that's your design, makes sense. But this is a way to engage your players. And then the next one is quality of life. What I mean by that is, if you play, again, using Elden Ring as an example, Elden Ring is, the more complex your game is, the more you need to balance your game, right? Otherwise, it's going to be frustrating. Even though it's a single player game, like, Elden Ring is a ridiculously hard game. And sometimes you just need to react on what you find about the game in the wild. What I mean by that is that who has, okay, show of hands, who has shipped a game on consoles or has gone through shipping a game on consoles, like, or maybe Apple, iOS, yes. So when you work on a game, or Steam, to be honest, like you will go through this thing called submission, right? You have to submit your game, the build of your game, to either Steam or Epic or Xbox or PlayStation or Apple or Android, right? I mean, like you have to go through it so that it can be released, so that it can be show up in their store. Going through the certification is a pain in the thing, right? It's hard because like they make you like go through like a lot of hoops to go through certification. Right? So updating your game is hard. Sometimes it's expensive. It's like when you release a game in Xbox, when you go through a certification and you will fail the certification, if you resubmit it too many times, they will make you pay for it. Right? So that's why people don't like to have to go through updating the content, going through certification, because it's expensive, from time, from money, whatever, right? So what Elden Ring did is that they actually, when you launch the game and you make it so that like you're actually connected online, they will pull a file, like some kind of like calibration file, into the game, into the game build, right? And then they will use that to override whatever build that they have. So at the very least, like let's say that like, oh, I want to nerf certain weapon or certain boss or whatever. You want to change the attribute of the game. instead of you rely on updating the whole game, you download a calibration file, for instance, which is pretty nifty. And it is just one way to do it. Like there are different ways to do it, right? I mean, like you can put up a file in S3, you can have some kind of API that gives you the latest data or whatever, right? I mean, like the point is that like there are different ways to do it, but you want to be able to configure your game from the backend without going through updating the whole game through the certification process. So that's kind of like quality of life from you and from the players, right? Because some players actually don't like to also get the title update. We call it title update because when they download the title update, it's a very destructive process. It will kick you out from the game. You have to like go to the dashboard. It will like start downloading the update, and you know it's just very destructive process. The other one is this is a quality of life from the players, right? I would say that one is The Witcher. Witcher, when it released in Switch, they do cloud save too, so you can pull the cloud save from Steam or from Go, and that's pretty cool because like you don't have to do it, but they figured that's like, well, I mean like people don't want to start over hundreds of hours replaying the game, right? So they do cloud save. So cloud save is like you need a backend to power it. In this case, they're actually powering it from Steam and from Go, but the point is that however you do it, it's just a good feature to have. Although Witcher is a purely single player game. Right? This one is actually from Need for Speed Rivals. When I was in EA, Rivals is a single player game, right? I mean, you don't need for speed, right? I mean, like you drive fast, I mean, like you try to avoid the cops and whatever. The nifty thing about this is that although you're seemingly you're just playing single player, you know, you are connected online. Your friends can pull this experience up in iPad or Android and things like that, and then they can like either drop in a cop's car, or they can interact with you in the game, right, without you even knowing it. So they're just toying with you. So that's kind of interactive, you know. If that's the experience that works for your game, companion experience can be very, very powerful, and it's a way to engage your player base. Okay. So, yeah. All right, so I kind of like throw in like a lot of features that you can actually think about when you're making a single player game. That's driven from the backend, right? So I'm gonna dig into some of them. All right, telemetry. So like why do you care about telemetry, right? Like why you care about telemetry is because you want to get data. You want to know what is going on with your game. Sometimes you don't know. I mean, like, okay, here's the thing. The last thing that you want to hear about your game is that it's in Reddit saying, or in Steam reviews saying this, like, this game is unplayable, I cannot get past this level. You know, it's like, you don't want that. Because at that point, it's already too late. Like, the damage is done, right? And you have to manage your community. It's like, like, we're working on it, guys. It's like, you want to be ahead of people discovering these problems. And the best thing to do it is just by getting the data in real time so you can figure out what is wrong with your game. And then you can react to it. And by reacting to it, that kind of ties into the tweetables, the control, like the server control, which again, like I will talk about after this. So yeah, like telemetry is like, you know, depending on like what is important for your experience, you can craft the data that you're collecting almost in real time by, is it a gameplay issue? Is it a UI, right? I mean, like, what type of data are we collecting, right? It's like, how many seconds does it take for players to leave a room? Or you present a UI, how many players actually click on a certain button? Right? Because sometimes the UI might be too complex that nobody can figure out how to get to certain things that you want. Right? So all those things are all telemetry. Like telemetry is just a piece of data that you send to the backend, and then the backend and then you build dashboards around the data. Right? Telemetry is super, super powerful. And the cool thing about telemetry is that you can piggyback on that to power other things, like to power statistics, to power leaderboard, to power community events, for instance, right? That spoon kill, like, you know, that giant spoon from Payday, is all driven from telemetry. Like, they already get the telemetry for like every time you kill an enemy or you know, an NPC, it sends an event, right? So you can just piggyback on that data. So that's good. And I think I already kind of mentioned this, yeah, but like essentially, like you can identify, you can highlight different types of things that you don't want your players to experience. Now, okay, so let's say that like you ship your game, you release your game, it's a big deal, right? Or like you just, you know, you release an update to your game, you release a piece of content, and you think that like, yeah, this piece of content is gonna be so awesome, and players gonna love it. And then you notice after you release it, and then you start seeing like the real-time data, it turns out that players cannot discover it, right? Or like players actually discover it, players starts playing with it, but then you realize from the data that's not the trend that you actually want to see, right? What do? This is where the other part of like the pre-planning that you want to do is that you want to have these kinds of server-side game data that so you can change the behavior of the game without having to redeploy a new build. Because that way you can react to it before waiting for everyone to discover that issue, right? So for instance, it's like, oh, I guess this is very, very crashing, right? I mean, like the update that you release, this new NPC that you just released is like, it's actually crashing everyone's thing. Maybe you should hide it, you know, like maybe you should just like not spawn that NPC and by having it controlled from the backend, you know, so again, like all of this requires some kind of like pre-planning to like put in the ability to not spawn certain characters based on the configuration that you have in the server, for instance, right? So, but if you design it well, you can. This is doable. I kind of mentioned like all the doomsday scenarios of like, hey, I mean, like this thing crashes your game and things like that. But also like it's not just that. Like sometimes, let's say that like you want to make your game, and then you want to release for the week of Easter, right? For the week of Easter, you want it to be Easter themed, for instance, right? Like how do you do that? You do that also by controlling it from the backend side, right? So like, you know, like, so you will have some kind of configuration that says that like, if this thing is turned on, if this value is on, then you want to spawn some Easter bunnies, and then you want to have things to be green or whatever, right? You can do that from server side, and for players, it's a surprise, right? Like where they launch the game, and then suddenly like things looks different. So you can do that also with kind of server-side configuration. You can do the things that I mentioned about the player engagement, for instance, like, you know, if the telemetry says that like, yep, like 1 million kills, or, you know, 1 million players have participated in this event, you can open up, like, unlock a brand new part of the game, for instance, for everyone, right? So that's a community achievement. You can do that, right? So all of those can be driven from server-side game data without having to release a new build. Yeah, I think I mentioned all the balancing things like that. All right, so the next part of it is the building the direct relationship with your players. This is kind of interesting. I mean, like most people don't really think about the fact that you want to build a direct relationship with your players. What I mean by that is when you release a game in Steam, when you release a game in Xbox or PlayStation and all that, and then you use some of the APIs that they have out of the box, it's great. I mean, like, you know, like the good news is you don't have to put a lot of effort in it. The API is there, you use the API, and it's fine, right? Because like some of these platforms have cloud save. Some of these platforms have statistics, but not all. The problem that you have if you're just relying on the built-in feature set from the different platforms is that you're fragmenting the player experience. It doesn't matter if you're just releasing it in one platform, right? But then, like, if you're actually, building, if you want to own like your IP, like you want to consider actually like having it so that the feature is just there regardless it's whatever platform that they play it from. I use again like the example of like The Witcher, right? The Witcher is great. It's like, I love The Witcher. I love the fact that they put in a cloud save for Nintendo Switch. So you can download the game, the save game, right, from GOG and from Steam. But that's not available anywhere else. And I don't know about you guys, like I actually have different copies of The Witcher because they keep on like supporting new platforms. So that creates a disjointed experience for me as a player, right? So that's something that you want to consider is like, yes, you can use some of the features from the platform, but then like, what is the cost to how you engage your players? Because the thing is that like, the other part of it is that if you, okay, so let's say that like you start collecting data from the different platforms, right? You don't get a way to actually see like across all your player base, regardless of whatever platform they play, iOS or Android or PC and all that. How are they doing? How many people is playing your game and then they drop off after 5 minutes? If you're making a free-to-play game, that's even more powerful to actually be able to see across the board of like where you want to spend your resourcing on, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a finite game. It's like you have only this much marketing money, you have this much, effort, right? Manpower effort to build certain features and all that. It's like you want to know what is the most important thing for your game, and the only way to know that sometimes is by getting a whole view of the whole thing. So that's why I mentioned that like you want to own the relationship with your players through your game by having some kind of backend to power it. All right, so this is the question, right? So now, does my single player game always needs to be online? And the answer is no. I worked in the rebooted Need for Speed game, the 2016 game, and it was a single player game for the most part, but they require you to be online. And the reason being is that if you're familiar with like Unreal or Unity, like there's a thing called authoritative server, right? And then like basically like they always require you to be connected to the authoritative server. I'm not going to get into too much detail into that, but the point is that there is a big backlash for requiring your games to always be online. Because from their perspective, it's like, I just want to play single player. It's like, I'm playing solo. Why do I have to be connected online, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. It's like, I would not recommend you to require players to always be online. Even though you're making your game to require backend. So this is, this is the making it to be online optional, right? So basically, you boot up the game will try to connect to the server at best attempt. If it can, it will start downloading things if it needs to, like let's say that the server-side data, that server-side config data, you download it, you cache it locally, and then that's that, right? And if the server is offline, because servers do go offline, unfortunately, they can still play the game. And that is fundamentally like the biggest problem also with some of the only online games these days. It's like, hey, if the server is down, you cannot play. Maybe it makes sense for that kind of game, but sometimes it does not make sense. If it is a solo-only game, people just assume that I can play the game even though I'm in a subway station. So just make it like seamless. So, in summary, make it optional, make it seamless, make it engaging. because if you don't make it engaging, I mean, the engaging is basically what you want, right? So I mean, like you want to give a perceived value to the players that, hey, there are extra values that you can get here if you're connected online, right? I mean, like you can play Elden Ring and you can turn off the online interaction. Like you can stop it completely. But you know, despite that, it's like I always turn it on because like I always get a chuckle because of all the random stuff that community makes within the game that I discover in the game. So for me, it's engaging. So yeah. So in conclusion. In conclusion, is like, why do you want to make your single player game to be the backend? It is really like to learn what players really like doing. I mean, like what they do, what they said they do, because that's another thing. It's like without actually like capturing the real data, it's really hard to actually go to Reddit and figure out like what your players are actually talking about. Sometimes it's like they said they don't like this, but on the other thread they said they like it. Right? So like, which one is it? Like, so sometimes like it's just good to just got the raw data and like you can figure it out the real thing, right? You know, take the human part of it. And then, you know, you want to be able to keep your experience fresh by having those kinds of like server-side control without having to release a game, you know, rebuild the game, release the game again in the different platforms, going through the platform submission and stuff like that. You can keep your game fresh. I haven't, like, in the Epic, I pointed at him because I know that like he works closely with Epic. In Fortnite, I remember when they were big announcing with the cross-platform features, it's like, yeah, Fortnite is going with cross-platform. At the time, cross-platform is not really a thing. It's like, you know, like this is a brand new, like, for the past 2 years is when cross-platform is becoming okay for Sony and Microsoft. Before that, like, they were like, no cross-platform. No cross-platform, right? But they were experimenting with it. So what they did is like they released a build on Xbox, on PlayStation, and on PC, and then oops, cross-platform is enabled, right? And then like there was a big like article about this, like, oh my god, it's like they enable cross-platform. They were able to patch it without actually releasing a new build to the game, and they do it by server-side configuration, right? I mean, like they can just like turn it off, and then everyone loses their crossplay. So you want that, and then you want to be able to fix the balances without having to release a new build, you know, cloud safe, and yeah. So it's all about making it easy for players and making it easy for you to control the experience, the narrative that you want your players to experience. Yeah, that was my talk. It was a short talk. And by the way, we're hiring. I think I mentioned that like we do backend for games. There are a lot of everything that I mentioned in here. There are a lot of solutions. Like you can build it yourself if you choose to. There are a lot of great platforms out there like Amazon. You can roll it yourself, right? So you can do that, or you can use some of the off-the-shelf solution. There are a lot of off-the-shelf solutions like PlayFab, us, Epic, online services, and so on and so forth, right? So you don't have a shortage of options, but whichever you go the route, I hope you see the value of having your single player experience to be powered by some kind of online interaction. Yes, hi. Yes, I can hear you. So the question is, should developers consider end of life of their servers? Like, let's say that like they have servers, right, for the game, and then should they consider how long does it take to take the servers off the life cycle? Is that yeah. the question is, should developers consider still having the experience to be playable, the game to be playable, even though the servers is no longer running, right? It's a tough one, to be honest. Like, the reason I mention this is that I work in EA and in Ubisoft, right? I mean, like, they took sunsetting, it's called sunsetting, it's like sunsetting games to be very, very hard. Because some games are just not playable if you don't have the servers anymore, right? But also you know that servers can be pretty expensive to run, right? So now you're in this impasse of like, how long are we gonna continue this player base, because you can see that player base are still playing it, and taking off the live support for the game. I think there are some games that release their servers so you can have community servers, right? I've seen some games that, you know what, we're not going to host our servers anymore, but here's the source code. If there are communities who want to host the servers, go for it. I think that's good. I mean, like, you know, that's one way to do it. Some other ways to do it is like, you just have to look at the trend, and then you have to make a call of like, how many people is going to be impacted. Because, like, give me an example, right? Let's say that like you're working on a sequel of the game that you're working on, right? Or like you want the player base to start moving into another experience that you're building. One thing to do is that you actually want to entice them to move to the other experience, either that's a sequel or another experience, right? By giving by giving them bonus or whatever to get them to move, and then you monitor it, and then from that point on, it's like, you know, if you have enough players to justify shutting down the servers because it's just too expensive, for instance, then sometimes that's the call that you have to make. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is no one size fits all. Unfortunately, it's very much depends on the type of game that you make. And also, like, in the context of this talk, right, like single player games, you have to always make sure that your game is fully playable without servers on. Because that's the expectation from the player. So thank you. All right, any other questions? In case you're wondering, I haven't beat the game yet. I think it's gonna take a while, but it's fun. Yes?
Not really a question, but just one that you didn't mention in the talk, but I was kind of thinking about as you were going over it, is Death Stranding and the like pseudo multiplayer kind of mechanics in that, and I thought that it added a lot to that game.
Right. Yeah. The note, I guess, is about Death Stranding, right? I mean, like some of the examples that I'm mentioning here are probably the mainstream ones, right? There shouldn't be any surprises from you guys, especially if you guys play games of like, yeah, I mean, but definitely like your creativity, like this is bound by your creativity. It's like there are different ways you can introduce optional, keyword here is optional, right? Optional and engaging features for your single player game if you're making a single player game. You know, if the players are opt-in to connect to online, but they don't have to. That's the point. And they can still enjoy the game. Any other questions? Yes. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is like the backend stuff for single player, is that like included like mods, like Skyrim, is that like all of backend?
The question is, the backend for the games, does it include mods? I think that's your question, right?
Yes.
I think mods is a type of backend for your game. Like if your game supports mods, or like if you want to actually encourage modding in your game, it's a features, but it's not limited to only mods, right? Like, you know, mods, like downloading mods, like actually like opening up your community so they can actually submit skins and all that and become just part of your community. I think that's a big cool thing that you can do. But also, you can have here's the other thing is like you can have multiple backends for your game, right? I mean, like you can have like, let's say for the sake of it, like mods IO to power up your modding, right? But then like you use some other backend, like let's say PlayFab or whatever to power your statistics, right? Or your telemetry. Like, so it doesn't, you don't have to just go with one. You can mix and match different things. Any other questions? Cool. Well, I'll be here. If you want to chat, I'll be here. So, but thank you so much for attending the show. I know that I'm not attending, coming to the conference and coming to my session. I know it's the last session of the day, so you guys are probably tired. Like, it's a long day. But yeah, thank you so much.